Awesome. So we're here in the middle of the rainforest, and we are surrounded by many different species. And we get really excited about that because we're really into biodiversity. Bio meaning life, diversity meaning diversity. So there's different types of biodiversity, and they're really important to us. One is sort of the most obvious, and that's species diversity. Species diversity is, you've got all these different plants, you've got all of these different types of flies, you've got all of these different types of birds, and it's really important to have different species diversity because different species in an ecosystem fulfill different niches, right? So you have some species that are going to be decomposing material that's fallen onto the ground, you're going to have some species that grow really tall, you're going to have some species that are providing food for animals on the ground. So it's really important in a healthy ecosystem to have a lot of species diversity. Do you have anything to add to that?
No.
One type of diversity, biodiversity, that I find really important is diversity across space. So within an ecosystem, you want a lot of species diversity, but then as you travel over space, you also want a lot of ecosystem diversity, right? So you might want some forested land, some grassland, and different things depending on what the climate asks you for. So even on our hike today, earlier, just like an hour ago, we were hiking through more of a beech forest, right? And so you had some spatial diversity. And that's really important because as species need different places to live over the course of their life histories, it's really important that those different habitats are available to them. Also, if there were to be some sort of huge event, like maybe a big flood, then maybe one ecosystem wouldn't be able to respond as well, but a nearby one would be able to. Especially when we start to think about resilience to climate change, having this spatial diversity is super important because some ecosystems aren't going to be able to adapt as quickly and readily to climate change, but others will. So if you have a lot of spatial diversity, that's going to help your whole ecological system respond better to great changes in the environment.
And by beech forest, she means beech, B-E-E-C-H,
Yeah,
which is genus Nothofagus. It's a kind of tree. It's not like along a beach, although that would be cool also.
Those were the ones with the little leaves that were more adapted to drought.
Yeah. And then that was going big from general biodiversity. You've got like species biodiversity, ecosystem biodiversity, and then all the way down is genetic diversity. So think about like the California condors, where there's only 44 left within an individual species. Yeah, we're talking about genetic diversity in one species. Or like the European royal families that got kind of inbred because they were too snooty to marry anyone else. Where if you don't have enough individuals, like I'm very different than Yari biologically, and she's very different than Marissa biologically, right, on a genetic level. And if you don't have those genes mixing, say a disease comes that your population is not ready for, because like all the people that live in one area only have one set of genes, that disease can wipe them out, and they're not resilient. But if you've got a really diverse group of people, like America, with all kinds of people from all over the world, those kinds of things are a lot less impactful, and you have a much more resilient system. Genetic diversity that we see on a day-to-day basis, humans are really good at speeding up evolution, specifically through our agricultural systems.
Which can be kind of cool.
Which can be really cool. It can also be problematic in some situations. But Brassica oleracea is the name of one species, which we have modified dramatically. So like one species normally looks like this fern, and there's like a big fern, and that's very different than this little tiny fern right here.
Different species.
Different species. But in the case of Brassica oleracea, we've made cauliflower and broccoli are the same species, as is kale, because when we were breeding for kale, we took broccoli and we tried to get something that had bigger leaves. So if you look at the flowers of kale, it's actually the exact same species as broccoli. Also kohlrabi, where we optimized for the base of the root bulb, which is that kind of big round Asian vegetable if you ever used it. Also some cabbages are the same as Brassica oleracea, and also Brussels sprouts. So if you ever look at the flower on a Brussels sprout, if you've ever seen a Brussels sprout out of a field, it's this big stalk that comes out of the ground with all these little balls on it. And each of those is the exact same as a broccoli flower, but we just optimized for size of flower when we were breeding those. So that's one species.
The genetic variation within that species.
And that's also the way that evolution happens, right? In nature, if that wasn't humans changing that species, that would have been pressures like this area is really hot and that area is really cold, but the same species lives in both. So in the hot area, over 100 million years, that species is going to grow to have smaller leaves like we talked about earlier. And so it would turn out more like broccoli than cabbage or whatever.
And then eventually, if those two different parts of the genetic variation get too different, or they're separated by some sort of barrier and they can no longer have any possibility of breeding together, then that means that they're different species.
That's called speciation, is that process.
So genetic diversity can lead to more species diversity over time.
Right. Really long time, though.
Do you want to talk about homogenization of our food system?
Okay. When you go into a grocery store, you see like...
one banana.
You see one kind of banana. For example, there's like 80 kinds of bananas if you go to Costa Rica that grow, and we get the Cavendish banana only in the United States, which doesn't have seeds. There's a lot of bananas that have seeds. There's a lot of bananas that are bright red. There's all these things. You've probably seen them like at specialty markets, like Mexican food stores or whatever. But you walk into the grocery store and you see like a half a dozen species. So like I just said, all the big green leafy vegetables are pretty much the same species. You've got lettuce and spinach and some others, but we've made it such that in California we grow the same fruits we grow in Alabama, or we grow the same fruits as we grow in Florida. And in the northern states, we grow the same kind of wheat in every single place. But there are 10,000 varieties of wheat. We used to have, we're down 97% of the agricultural genetic diversity that we used to have is gone. It's extinct. 97%. In Hurricane Katrina, three varieties of chickens went extinct because the only places that they grew, three varieties of chickens, because the only places that they grew were along the Gulf Coast. And those areas were totally wiped out. All the chickens died because there was no one to feed them or they got flooded. And so things like that, plus the fact that we as consumers, when I go to Safeway in the Northwest in Washington, I want to see the exact same color and shape of tomato. I want my Roma tomato, and I want my big round beefsteak tomato. And then when I go to, I don't know, Cars in Oregon or whatever, another grocery store, I want to see those same ones, right? That's like what we've been raised to see. And yesterday we ate this awesome orange
That was fun.
pokey vegetable that we have no idea what it was. And then also something called a sweet cucumber that turned out to be a fruit, and you peel it and it's really, really sweet. And these are all things that we just don't have in developed countries.
And so, like, yeah, fun fruits are really great, and we should just like biodiversity for the sake of biodiversity. But something that really concerns us and why we really care about keeping all of this biodiversity is that, okay, let's take the banana, for example. So we have this Cavendish banana. This is the one with the fungus, right?
No, this was the one before the Cavendish.
Okay. The banana that we had that was just one banana before we used the Cavendish, we just had one, and the same thing. It was like all the grocery stores had this one species of banana, and then there was this one fungus that came along, and it was really good at attacking this one species of banana.
Variety,
so,
not species.
I'm sorry, this one variety. This is within the same species, right? So it attacks this particular variety of banana, and it wipes out all of our bananas. And then think about that, what that does to the economy, what that does to a lot of people's food supplies. A lot of people rely on different kinds of bananas.
Look this up online because I don't remember what year, but let's say 1996 this happened. For like 3 years, you could not buy bananas in the United States. And this is something that happened before my lifetime, so I don't remember it. But until the Cavendish banana came along, which was from a specific breeder in, I think, Nicaragua, we didn't have bananas. And this is, like, that matters in terms of bananas and things, but it really matters in terms of things like rice. Rice right now in China is getting destroyed by what's called, it's got a bunch of numbers. It's a specific kind of rust, which is a fungus. And we only grow one kind of rice there because in the Green Revolution in the 1990s, 1980s, we changed all those systems over where each county in China used to have its own kind of rice. Right. And now they only grow one kind in the country. And that same kind of rice is also grown in the Philippines and in Indonesia and in California.
It's not safe
it's
to
not
just
a
grow
resilient
one
system.
species. Right. And
or
so,
one variety.
And so, yeah, so there can be different sorts of pathogens like fungus that can attack our food if we just grow one species. The other thing that we think about a lot is uncertainty, right? So especially in a time where our global systems are changing a lot with climate change and land use change, what we're seeing is just a lot of unpredictability, right? So we don't know what kinds of pathogens could be out there that could start attacking our food system. One thing that's happening with climate change is a lot of waterborne pathogens are moving more easily and dispersing more easily in different areas of the world. So, and of course the climate is changing, and we don't know exactly how this one variety of our food is going to react to different climatic conditions. So it's really a lot healthier if we were growing more biodiverse food system, especially in this era of uncertainty and of changing climate.
For example, who doesn't love chocolate? All chocolate comes from a collection of like 7 countries in West Africa. You've got like Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, Benin, maybe Cameroon, like a little set of them. And coffee yields have been declining by like 5% a year, which means that within 20 years, you would be literally at zero cocoa, chocolate production. And that would be awful, right? We love chocolate. So there was actually a really big meeting recently with all of the chief, like the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO, all these people of all the big chocolate companies in the world. We're talking Hershey's, we're talking Cadbury, we're talking Mars, which actually owns a lot more chocolate than you think. They're not just Mars bars. As well as a bunch of big environmental organizations, because they needed to be there to talk about the environmental impacts of moving a crop from 7 countries to a bunch of other countries. So World Wildlife Fund, all these groups were there, and they were talking about how are we going to replant this whole crop, because in West Africa it's getting drier because of global climate change. This is happening. The farmers know it. The companies know it. They all need to move. And so the entire cocoa crop that makes chocolate is going to be replanted in the next 10 years in different countries. They're looking at Central America. They're looking at Southeast Asia, places that are kind of similar, but that under the current climate projections that we have from this panel called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is all 198 countries on Earth, all of their government agencies like NASA and the big ones coming together to work on this. Under the climate projections we have, these are the places you can grow chocolate in the future. So it's like, it's a really, really big economic issue. Right? And what if we had 5 species or 5 varieties of cocoa? Maybe we could just start replanting a different one, but they want this one because this system is tuned to this one, and it's going to cost them a ton of money. And I bet you we're going to see new cocoa companies, new chocolate companies in the next 10, 15 years that are more creative and are more at the cutting edge of this, just like the solar industry has been doing recently.
Woo! Anyway, diversified systems are way more resilient.